Class is in session. Hey guys, what's going on? It's your boy Tony. So this is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to with Binary Gamer. We have a very special episode this week where I'm going to be sitting down with Denis Dyack, former CEO of Silicon Knights and now CCO of Quantum Entanglement Entertainment. If you haven't checked out what they have going on over there, you definitely should. Going to put a lot of links and different things down in the description of this video and or the podcast episode. This is going to be coming to you both video and audio, so be on the lookout for that. It was, wow, this was an amazing episode to sit down and do, and it was really, really awesome to sit down with someone that had a hand in games that I played as a kid, and before I really cared or knew about the people that played I played the games, but the people that made or had a hand in these games, as a kid, you don't really think about that kind of stuff. Even when you're, a teenager, it's a lot easier now to follow those people because it's much easier to be in contact with them with things like Twitter and Facebook and, Patreons, things like that. But back in the day when I was playing Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, I didn't know that, I didn't know the names of the people that made the game, let alone that I would one day be sitting down and talking with the guy that ran the company. So this is a really cool episode and a really cool interview, in my opinion. I just want you guys to sit down and enjoy it. So yeah, let's get it going. Let's get this class started, shall we? Hit it, future Tony. Good evening, class. My name is Tony Spears, and you're listening/watching this one to Binary Gamer, your weekly podcast that is going to bring you a little education about a wonderful thing we love, video games. This is a very special episode, one that we've had in the works for quite some time now. And the reason why is because I'm sitting down with my new friend, Mr. Denis Dyack. Denis, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Denis Dyack. I've been making video games now for around 30 years. I founded a company called Silicon Knights that made many games in the past. You may have heard of some of them. Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, Eternal Darkness, Sanus Requiem, Two Human, Cyber Empires. I've been doing it for quite a long time. And recently I formed a company called Quantum Entanglement Entertainment, where I partnered with some film and television guys, where we're doing film, video games, and TV all under one roof.
That is quite a resume, sir, I have to say.
Thank you.
So now first off, I just like to say that I am a huge fan of a lot of the games. Sadly, I've actually never played Eternal Darkness. I didn't have a GameCube long enough to really get into the library. I played long enough to play Wind Waker and Mario Sunshine, and then I can't remember why I ended up not having the GameCube anymore. But yeah, so I was separated from my GameCube and didn't get to dive into a whole lot. But I am a big fan of the Legacy of Kain games, and
thank you.
There's just a whole lot of games that Silicon Knights did that I got my hands on and played and really loved. And I mean, it's actually kind of mind-blowing in a way to actually meet you, because I've never actually sat down with someone that shaped or had a hand in one of the games that I can recall a good amount of the time that I spent with it. So thank you very much for joining me here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. So
awesome. So I just like to start out with a handful of questions. One of them is, so where does your journey in games begin? When is the moment that you realized that you wanted to work in video games, to make video games?
That's a good question. I think when I was very young, I was playing. This goes way back now. There was a game. There's an Ultima series, which was one of the original RPGs from someone called Lord British or Richard Garriott, and I was playing Ultima 3. I was in high school. I just started wrestling very seriously, and I was playing this game for hours and hours on my Atari ST. So it was an Atari ST. So it goes the days when there were multiple computers, just not a IBM PC. And I was playing this game and I was stuck. I couldn't get anywhere. and I kept going around the world, and there was this whirlpool that kept just bouncing around, and I looked at it, I was like, got to avoid the whirlpool, got to avoid the whirlpool. So for like 2 days I was stuck, couldn't find it anywhere. And then I just got tired. And then eventually I hit the whirlpool by mistake, and I thought it killed my entire party. And then boom, it brought me to an entirely new world and continent, and that's why I was stuck. And then from there I could continue the journey. And I remember thinking that moment where I could actually, I had agency in the game, where I felt that some of my actions and the things that I had done was so powerful. I was an avid reader. I love movies and television. You know, I love all kinds of things, but this particular medium had, because of that event, it really was an epiphany to me that these kind of interactions are different than anything else that's out there. So at that point, I still remember that point, and it's many, many years ago now, probably almost 35 years ago, where I said, that's it. This is what I want to do for a living.
Awesome. I love hearing these stories about people, and like when they like have that moment where they're like this is it, like this is the thing I want to do. It's not always video games. For some people it's, you know, like this is the business I want to own, or like I want to be a professional chef. I love when people like have that moment and they're just like, like this is my calling. So that's amazing. And it's funny that Ultima got you there, because I don't have a deep history with the Ultima franchise, but I have friends that swear by it. I have friends that were playing Ultima Online from like day one, like to where they finally got a PC cobbled together that could actually run it at the time, and they've stuck with it. And it's one of those things that they're just like, man, like Ultima needs to come back. And I'm like, well, I don't know if it will, but I hope it does, because that game has a real fervent fan base.
I love that series. It really left an impression on me, and I think a lot of things behind it. When I founded Silicon Knights, it was called Silicon Knights because we wanted to be the knights in shining armor in the games industry. And if you look at a lot of the logos, we have the sword going into the stone and all that imagery about essentially Arthurian legend is making the world, one of the main themes is making the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And with certainly with the Ultima series, they really moved on themes of the avatar and the virtues. And you have to be a good person to complete that game. Yeah. And I think games like that are good. I think certainly, and what I mean by that is not necessarily to espouse certain virtues on people, but creating a game that goes beyond the sum of its parts, where you leave impressions with people. And, as an example, I know when we were creating Eternal Darkness, one of the things that we wanted to leave to have people take away is a catharsis and a feeling that they've gone through a journey, and that by the time that experience is done, they've learned some lessons on, some things. And so to me, that's what gaming's all about. And, if we can leave impressions and have people in all entertainment, really, like those are the best movies for me. When I look at The Usual Suspects, or I look at other movies that have really moved me along, it's just sort of where the plots are really interesting, but by the time I'm done, I've learned some lessons. And it's like, oh, that was a really interesting experience. That's what, to me, is important about video games.
Yeah, it's not very often that you find games anymore that really impart that, like, some form of like moral lesson, or give you something to walk away from, where you're like, oh man, like this is like some deep stuff. It's not fair to say that games don't elicit some kind of feeling. I just recently finished Breath of the Wild, and that game pulled all the feels on me. But but like as far as like coming away with a message, it's just like good triumphs over evil. That's kind of Nintendo's shtick with that series, and that's fine. But yeah, the ones that can really sit down and say, hey, like this is what you should take away from this. Like this is what good is, and this is what bad is, or like this is the in between, things like that. So I agree with you that we need more of that in games.
Well, yeah, and so as an example, and again, I love Nintendo games. I think they're great. You know, obviously I worked with Nintendo for quite a while, and I think they're some of the best creators in the world. But when you look at something like, say, Legacy of Kain, a lot of when we first created that game, a lot of the things that we tried to do was really show that everything is not black and white. So, and a movie that really inspired me in that direction was the movie Unforgiven. So,
great movie.
Fantastic movie where you look at all the characters in that movie. You look at Clint Eastwood's character, you look at Little John's character. At the beginning, you love Clint Eastwood. You think he's like the best guy. And you hate Little John. You're just like, I don't like that guy. By the time the movie's done, it's almost completely inverted. And you get taken on this journey where you're like, wow, all he wanted to do, Little John, before he was killed was build his roof. And, you know, yeah, he wasn't a perfect person, but he didn't deserve to die.
Yeah.
And so it's that kind of thing where when we were looking at Legacy of Kain, where I think that game was really popular because we actually addressed issues like that thematically. We didn't tell people what the answers were, but we exposed them to, you know, you're a vampire, the world hates you, you hate yourself, you don't even want to be there, you have to now. You thought this was going to be a journey of revenge, and you realize that you're a puppet in this grand master strategy of something you don't really understand, and you've got to go through and kill and obliterate all these people. How do you feel about that? And those kind of things are I think life lessons where, you know, when you start out and you're young, you think you're invincible. As you get older, you realize that, wow, there's some things that I can't change as much as I try. So what can I do in this world that helps me, you know, get by day to day and make me feel good as a person that I've accomplished something? And so these are the sort of messages that I think I wish more video games would do. And I think as the AAA market goes to more explosive graphics along the lines, and when I look back at the Legacy of Kain days, it certainly has lost a lot of that. There's a lot, and it's really hard to sort of sell those things in pitch meetings. So as a creator, I've always snuck them in. I've always basically said, look, we're going to create all these great things, and here's all the shiny bells and whistles, knowing that all the other things that I want to accomplish are going to get done just because that's the kind of games that I create. So,
wow, it's funny because I think like that where you're talking about like, oh, they want it to be this nice and flashy, and then in your head you're like, well, I'm going to sneak this moral message in, or this message that, you know, it's not all black and white. It reminds me of that quote by Robert Downey Jr. where he says, when someone's telling you what you need to do, just sit there and nod your head, and then when they're done talking, go and do the thing you're going to go do anyway. So it's definitely a thing of like, yeah, we want super high graphics, and it's like, okay, cool. I'm also going to put in this storyline that is going to paint this picture and deliver this story, but I promise it's going to look real good when we do it.
You are exactly, and so you never want to deceive anyone, but you want to make sure that when you partner with someone that you're mutually aligned. And I think most people that are going to work with me know that I'm very story driven, very narrative driven, and I do talk about a lot of these things, but quality and graphics in certain directions, I always stick to those themes. And but at the same time, you always want to do more, and I think that's what's expected in some senses by the audience. So so anyway.
Okay, so moving on with some other questions. So sure. What gave you the idea for Quantum Entanglement Entertainment, or like where did the whole thing spring from, and what brought you guys, or, you know, your group, to the idea of taking, you know, games, film, television, and just mashing it all under one roof? Like, how'd that whole thing start up?
Well, so let's see. It's a good question. I was taking a break for a while. I was at one point I had lost some weight, and I gained it back, and I was pretty overweight, and I was you know, it's a song, but it's I think it's very true. If you want to improve the world in some small way, the easiest thing you do is improve yourself. So at one point in my life, I was like, okay, I'd gotten up to 400 or so pounds again, and I was like, look, I'm going to start losing weight. So I'd taken a break and just concentrated on losing weight, and that's what I was doing. I really wasn't thinking about doing anything for a while. And I met up with Paul Rapovsky, who did a lot of the motion capture for Too Human. And he kept calling me up and said, "Hey, I've got some ideas. I want to talk to you. And he's done a lot of, he was the executive producer on a TV series called Lost Girl, which was very successful in Canada, like one of the most successful independent shows of all time, actually, within Canada. And he was connected to he's done all kinds of, blockbuster movies. He's worked with Vin Diesel a lot. And I'm trying to think of, just quickly off the top of my head, he's done a lot of stuff. And so he came to me and said, I think that movies, film, and television are converging. And I agree with that in many senses, because certainly video games are a new art form. I've always talked about video games as the 8th art form, and film considered the 7th art form. And what I was interested in too was learning more. I'm a big person as far as education and learning goes. I always think you should be constantly learning. And so I've won essentially what I guess was would be considered an Academy Award for writing on Eternal Darkness. So it won Best Story back in 2001 or 2000. I can't remember the exact date, but it was essentially for writing. I've got 2 computer science degrees and a phys ed degree. And I always thought that, yeah, I can write for sure. But when I compare some of the writings that I've done in the past to TV, film, and television, I do think that they're generally a level higher than what's in video games. And so I thought there could be a lot learned. And I was thinking, well, imagine what we could do if we brought all these people together and started creating things all under one umbrella. What could we do? And so that inspired me to want to do that. So Paul called me up. He introduced me to Jonathan, who's the other partner in Quantum. And we basically said, let's start this new company. Let's get things going. Let's look at producing film, television, and video games, and we'll see where it goes. And, we've been pretty quiet since we started. But that's how it all came to be, essentially.
Nice. Awesome. So essentially a meeting of the minds, and then Quantum Entanglement came forth from there. That's really cool.
Yes, correct.
I keep imagining, because when I was doing research and things like that, and I was reading up on it, and I kept picturing in my head a place where you had programmers and developers making games with a story written by show writers for television, and then with like the polish of like film and movies. And that's I was kind of picturing those teams working together in tandem on one product. But I understand now that it's more along the lines of like 3 pillars or 3 branches of the.
Well, it could be either, but no, your vision is exactly what I envision and why it inspires me to do it. That's what that's what I want to happen, and that is what the video game industry needs in my eyes, and it's a lot of what I've looked forward to create when I create video games doesn't exist out there in video games quite a bit. There's a few developers or directors that try to create story and serious themes, but by and large, we're looking at action and graphics and sizzle and spectacle. You're looking at a lot of spectacle in video games, and a lot of technology. Just before I jumped on this podcast, I was watching some previews of some of the E3 stuff that's coming up, because E3 is starting. I guess now we're having some pre-conferences.
I think EA just started their conference like 10 minutes ago as the recording of this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And so here's the interesting thing, and a lot of people tend not, which I think is a very important separation. A lot of people think that technology will improve the game across the board. So everyone's talking about the new technology of the latest hardware coming out. And I think this is one of the things, that an example that Nintendo's understood for a while, that they are not directly proportional at all in some ways. So certainly graphics and performance, better technology is going to help you that way. However, when it comes to gameplay and narrative and just structure of the type of title that you're creating, That has got absolutely nothing to do with how good your technology is. And I was just watching some of the commentary, a lot of people saying, well, this new hardware coming out, I think the new Xbox that they're going to be in, I think they're announcing now, and I think it's going to be released in October or something, the Scorpio. And I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be very interesting. But a lot of people say, I can't wait to see better gameplay with this, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, they're not correlated at all. Better hardware is not going to get you better gameplay.
It's just better visuals.
Better visuals, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of people don't distinguish that's really what's happening there. And I'm looking forward to the time when people start understanding that. But maybe they won't. Maybe it's just something as a creator or the people who analyze that understand. But to me, and it's part of the hype just going in overdrive, but to me, that's a very important distinction. And I think that's what, as an example, if you want to look at great developers, that's what, really makes Nintendo stand apart. I remember when people were talking about the Switch, they were hoping it was going to be the most powerful system out there. And it's okay to hope that, but at the end of the day, that's not really their core set of values. And I thought it was highly unlikely that they were going to release something that, as an example, was going to be better than the Scorpio, because they're more focused on gameplay, which they know is not driven by hardware specs.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think the Scorpio is going to be really interesting, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays compared to like the PS4 Pro. As far as the numbers are concerned, the PS4 is going to be punching above its weight when it's going up against the Scorpio. But I do agree with you, though, that doesn't really count as the end all be all when it comes to games. Because if you take the Switch as a perfect example, and I'm glad you brought it up, if you take the Switch and then put the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, there, and you have those, and compared to games that have come out in, let's say, the last 3-4 years on, the PS4 or the Xbox One, it's actually kind of crazy to think that this was pulled off on what is considered a less powerful system. And
yeah,
it really blows my mind, because like playing through that game, I was like, how are they doing this? Like I don't have to have full disclosure, I don't have a Switch. I was actually playing on my Wii U, and even on the Wii U, I was like, how are they doing this? Like, how is this possible? Like, what secret sauce did they tap into in this console that no one knew was there? And it just goes to show that you can make amazing games, you can make a masterpiece, and not have to have the Corvette equivalent of a game console. But it's just
absolutely. I guess that was an early lesson I learned too. So the first game that I created was on the Atari ST. It goes back to that Ultima story. It was called Cyber Empires, and we made it on 3 systems. We made it on the Atari ST, the Amiga, and then right at the end we ported it to the PC. And I was convinced that the Atari or the Amiga was going to just destroy and obliterate the PC as a home PC system, as a personal computer, because anyone who back then, if you analyze the PC compared to the Amiga or the Atari, Amiga and the Atari blew the PC out of the water. The PC was terrible, had terrible graphics, terrible response time, terrible audio. It was just, on almost any possible hardware spec, was way behind these two. And yet in the end, it completely obliterated them. And that was a real lesson learned from me from two things. Predicting technology trends, very difficult. But then on top of that, really you have to look at mass market things to see how well you're going to do. And I think when you look at something like, say, Breath of the Wild, you have everyone at Nintendo has worked together now for almost 40 years. So they have teams that have literally worked together for 40 years. And that's their secret sauce. They're very skilled people. They are very smart in the way they do it. And you don't have a lot of that, frankly, in some of the other larger companies out there. And that is what it is. And so that's, I was always convinced that Zelda was going to be pretty awesome. So, and So that's, in my opinion, that's what's happening there. So
Yeah, I don't want to dive into another like tangent about Legend of Zelda because I could talk about that game forever. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that was definitely one of those things where I saw little snippets and I was like, man, they might be able to pull this off. Like Nintendo might be able to get that magic back again. And then I actually sat down with the game myself. And in the first half hour of playing that game, I was like, nope, like this is it. This may be the single greatest game that they have done in the last decade. And
It's very good. Yeah, for sure.
there's quite a few people that would probably agree with me. All right, so moving on, I have something a little more topical to what you guys are working on right now. So you're working on a game called Shadow of the Eternals. So what can you tell us about that, and what can we expect?
Well, for right now, expect no announcements.
That's fair.
So I just did a channel update where we've got a YouTube channel that we post things on every 2 or 3 weeks or so. I was doing it every week for a while, but it's hard to do that, which you know.
Yeah, you got to find the time there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And since Shadow of the Eternals didn't go forward with Precursor games, and I took that from Precursor, bought it all from Precursor and stuff. I've been working away trying to figure out how to best position it. So I would say what to look for is significant change, and when it's time to talk about it, there'll be a lot to talk about. But right at this point, it's just not time. I know a lot of people have been saying for a super long time, Dennis, come on, tell us something, or we believe the game is dead, or
tell us anything.
Anyway, well, see, the funny thing about me, as an example, a lot of people feel actually, understand this about myself and the way that I've done things traditionally. And so between I think it was Legacy of Kain and Eternal Darkness was almost 4 or 5 years. So in between that time, Silicon Knights did not release a game. And a lot of people need to understand, for me, is that I'm very persistent, and I'm very patient. And I'm 50 now, so I feel I have another 15 to 20 years of video games to be made. Maybe 25 if I'm lucky, and I will just take my time and work at it the best I can. My sort of role, I think, as a director and as a creator of video games, is not to release video games on a certain time period, which I wish I could. Don't get me wrong, I wish I could release one every month, but I can't. What I can do, though, is work really hard to the point where when I do release a game, it'll be something that people can be very happy with, and something that I can stand behind and be, proud of. And so that's where we're working at with Shadow of the Eternals, and there's other things going on as well that aren't announced. And I look forward to talking about those in the future. And I appreciate everyone who keeps asking, and any kind of support that people throw away, I really embrace. So that's much appreciated, and I'm just really sorry to say all the time we can't talk about anything yet. And it's these things take a super amount of time. I don't have Silicon Knights, which was 200 plus people working on stuff right now. So Quantum is a startup, and we're working, slowly building, and it takes time. So I'm sorry, but there's just beyond that. That's it.
That's all right. And trust me, I'm a firm believer that it's better to wait until you have something concrete to talk about, something that you can put out there, as opposed to being like, well, we got this thing and we got that thing, because then you start leading people along, and at some point they're like, I don't want to hear about this till it's done. You know what I mean? It's better to keep the mystery out there.
Exactly. And I think I've watched a lot of Kickstarters, as an example, where they release a lot of stuff and the team's not that experienced, and then they do make some mistakes. And by the time it's finished, the vision is so different than when they first announced it. People are really upset with that kind of thing, and I don't want to do that. And I'm not implying that this is going to be a Kickstarter or anything like that.
Yeah, I understand.
But it's more of the timing and the way that you release things is super important. So, and if it takes 5 years, then it takes 5 years. If it takes 20, it takes 20. I don't think it's going to take that long, but I don't want to make any guarantees. So
All right, cool. Well, I mean, hopefully we can have you back on the show again when it gets closer to the time. We can talk a little more about it.
I would love to. I would love to for sure.
All right, so with that, what games have you turned to in the past when it comes to like inspiration for say like story or game mechanics, or maybe like even like the world or framework that a game takes place in? Like, what are a few you can think of off the top of your head as far as like, oh well, this makes a lot of sense and kind of goes with what we're shooting for, what we envision with this game.
That's a really interesting question, and I think a good question. And the answer, I don't know if it's going to surprise you or not. So I generally, for story, I generally don't. Only because I find that there's not a lot of strong story in video games, and it's really like a needle through a haystack. So for story and inspiration, books I find by far the strongest thing. So I'm a huge horror fan. I'm a huge science fiction fan. So Ian M. Banks, with the Culture series on the science fiction side. I also love I love the Hyperion series as an example. If you're into that kind of stuff, and also a lot of sort of really dark horror on the book side. I really love. On the gameplay mechanics side, I generally tend to explore all over the place. I play a lot of indie games where I find nuggets all over the place for games. So for gameplay and inspirational gameplay, absolutely got to play the games. And the other thing that we were talking about earlier is board games.
Yeah,
I think that board games are something that a lot of people overlook when they're looking at game design, because a board game is a very interactive, very high bandwidth version of a video game that happens on the fly. So I love playing board games, and that's what I look to for very unique, interesting gameplay features.
Okay, and I mean that makes sense. There's nothing that screams game mechanics more than sitting down and opening the instructions on a board game and having to really understand them, because unlike a video game, a board game, you have to understand the mechanics so you can actually have the game go forward, as opposed to a game it's just, okay, well, like the game mechanics and interaction will come to you and we'll let you know when it happens. But for the most part, we've got the steering wheel here. And I mean, there's a lot of games I can think of now. I mean, board games I can think of now that I think would make just amazing games. And some of them that do have video game parallels that I still think the board game is actually better. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with Pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Great game.
Yeah, and the whole team-based mechanic there is what I think is crucial to that. It's about, organizing your team and keeping everybody on track and working toward a common goal. But then you have a game like Plague Inc., which is kind of Pandemic flipped on its ear, where you're playing as the virus and you're trying to wipe out humanity and everything. And I think that it's one of those games where they are kind of a parallel, but they're sort of like, obviously they're clashing because you're playing two different sides. And I honestly think that there's a bevy of board games that would just make amazing transitions to video games.
I agree.
And it's just about trying to find someone to pick and choose which ones to take. I mean, there's so many good, like in the vein of horror. Like if someone took the Arkham Horror or Eldritch Horror series and made those into a game, oh my gosh.
I love the Arkham board games. Actually, there's a really neat story that, and this is how I got into board games. So we created, I guess our third game, the game before Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. We created a game called Dark Legions, and when we pitched the proposal, we're working with a group called SSI at the time, and I was a huge fan. I was still a huge fan of Archon, so it's kind of my homage to Archon. But when I put this whole strategy, it was really a strategy game where it was kind of like you had all of these vampires and warlocks and illusionists, and you would fight on this board where you'd summon people in, then you'd fight over the squares, very much kind of like Archon. which was inspired from the Star Wars, the chess game that they had, where the creature would pick up and throw them on the ground and stuff. So that's where it all came from.
Nice.
And so during this pitch meeting, the executive producer said to me, "Well, what kind of games do you like?" And I said, "Well, I love Heroes of Might and Magic. It's one of my favorite strategy games of all time."
Great series.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And he's like, "Oh, so you must have played Titan." And back then I didn't play board games. And I was like, "Titan? No, what's Titan?" And he's like, "Well, I thought you borrowed a lot of stuff from Titan for Dark Legions." And I was like, "No, I have no idea. I've never played Titan before." I said, "Back then I didn't play many board games." So I bought Titan. And Titan is almost identical to Heroes of Might and Magic, literally.
Wow.
You have stacks of dragons and creatures that go around, and when you fight, they actually have a literal screen, another board that blows out where you move your pieces around, exactly like Heroes of Might and Magic. And so back in those days, back in the early 90s, I think that's what a lot of people did. They converted board games over, and some of those games are fantastic, like Sid Meier's Civilization.
Oh yeah,
they're all based off of board games.
Civilization is essentially Settlers of Catan.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, that's the first thing that popped in my head.
No, it's open, free conversation. Yeah. So I'm hyper and talk too much, so feel free.
Oh no, that's fine. But yeah.
So that got me into board games. When I started seeing that, I was like, wow, there's a lot to be learned from this medium, so I'm gonna start diving in.
Yeah.
So,
and it's funny too, because I played quite a bit of Civilization up to Civilization 4. I didn't get into Civilization 4 because at the time I just didn't have a PC that would run it well, and I played enough. Yeah. I played enough Civ 3 to where I was like, I've got my fill of this for now. And then someone did introduce me to Settlers of Catan, and I was like, I don't understand. Like, what's the whole point of the game? They're like, oh, you're trying to get your civilization to outmatch the opponent's civilization. I was like, so it's like Civ? And they're like, I mean, I guess. I'm like, no, dude, this sounds exactly like Civ. And then we sat down and played, and I was like, yes, this is 100% Civilization. And but yeah, it's so funny to think of like how many of those games have direct parallels in video games, and how many game genres you don't realize are inspired by board games. Like if you take any RTS, it is essentially inspired by games like Risk, Strategio. I mean, the list goes on, but all those games are inspired by that same formula. It's just someone was like, well, we can put this into the virtual world and we can make it a little easier to play, a little quicker to play. And I mean, but even still, you have, Risk as a video game, just a straight port into a video game, and people still love playing those games. So
I agree.
It's always surprising to me to find like what inspires games, and board games and literature in general are, two huge inspirations when it comes to, bringing things over to games that feel fresh or, refine ideas that are already out there.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm a huge, it's funny. So what I'm waiting for, it's been killing me. So I was in the Kickstarter for the expansion of Cthulhu Wars. So
I'm not familiar with that game.
Oh, you're not familiar with Cthulhu Wars by
No.
Sandy Peterson? So he's taken the Lovecraft universe, and
that's a scary place.
Yeah, it's great. I love Lovecraft, and essentially the world's already come to an end. It's Armageddon, and you're taking all of the great ancients, or old ones, and they're all fighting for power on the world and are in different dimensions or different places. So they have these awesome figures. And I think I kickstarted it almost a year and a half ago now, and they've gone through all the machinations, and finally, but it was over $1,000 for the whole thing. So it's really expensive. Yeah. And I want to paint the figures. I used to play a lot of Warhammer and Warhammer 40K. So I did all the painting and stuff. And it just, for me, it was sort of a soothing exercise with all the manic craziness that happens when you're making a video game. Just sit down and paint. You had to do it slow. You couldn't go fast.
Yeah.
And, so I'm waiting for that board game, and I'm so excited to get it. So that's the next big one on the queue. Besides the House on Haunted Hill that we just talked about, that you mentioned. So
that is a really cool game. That one took me by surprise. I actually, a little insider baseball, but I have a friend that owns a game shop, and so he lets me borrow demos of games all the time. And that's when, like, I'll bring them home and I'll play them with my family and with a couple friends. and then that'll kind of gauge whether or not I want to actually purchase it and buy into it. And he let me borrow that because I just got done with Arkham Horror, and I tried playing it with a friend of my wife. My wife was like, "This game takes way too long." Like, she's like,
Yeah.
"It's cool and it's really interesting, but the time investment is just way too much." And I was like, "Okay, I
Yeah.
get it." So then I took it back and I was like, "Sorry, man, no dice." She didn't really care for it. It took too long. And he was like, "Oh, then you need to play Betrayal at the House on the Hill." I think it's just Betrayal on the House on the Hill. I'm pretty sure. I can never remember.
Trail on that. I'm mixing up with the famous movie, so I apologize.
No, 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 it's fine. And so I was like, okay, well, like, give me the elevator pitch. And he was like, you're a group of teens in a haunted house. Something's gonna happen. You have to get out. And I was like, okay, that seems simple enough. So then I got it home, and we started reading into the instructions and started figuring out the game. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is basically a horror movie simulator. Okay, this sounds really cool. So then we sat down and we must have played like 7 games over the course of like a Saturday evening. And like, not that they're super quick. It can be anywhere between like 30 to 45 minutes depending upon, how well you play. But
Yep.
it's one of those things of like you can get through a game and then be like, okay, cool, like let's reset it and we'll cycle into the next game. But the thing I forgot to mention when I was describing it to you was the mansion is just a blank board. And then as you go through the mansion, random tiles build the rooms. And like
Very cool.
so the layout of the mansion is never the same twice.
Yeah.
So you go through, not only do you have different scenarios, but there's different ways to move through the house and to get away. Like sometimes it'll be something like there's a dumbwaiter here, so you can go up to the second floor. Or in that same room, the next game, it might be like there's an interdimensional portal that's going to move you all the way to the east wing, stuff like that. So it can get kind of hectic, but it's a lot of fun to play. So you definitely need to go and check that one out.
I am gonna. You've already sold me, so I'm like, oh, it sounds great. So
Nice.
I can't wait. Thank you.
No worries. I'm always happy to give people game recommendations, whether it's video games or board games, and I love hearing back later on. They're like, "Oh man, you were so right. This game is amazing."
Cool.
All right.
I'll check it out. I'll let you know.
Awesome. So the next one is it's kind of an easy question, I guess, kind of a softball for you. But how do you feel that game development has changed in the time since you started in real serious game development to now with Quantum Entanglement?
It's a great question. It's actually not that much of a softball. It's a hard question from a standpoint because it's changed so many times over the 30 years that I've been involved in the industry. So my background education-wise is I've got a degree in computer science and a master's degree in computer science, and I took those when I was in high school. And I told that one story. I felt that I wanted to make video games, but I didn't feel I had the tools, so I felt I had to put myself through school and get a computer science degree to do that. And I went on. I loved school so much. I went on to do a master's in computer science on AI and human-computer interface. So I did a bit of neural networks and a bit of interface work. And our second game, called Fantasy Empires, actually had a running learning neural network in it back in the day where neural networks were very rare. And but back then, when I started going to GDC, it was like 50 people, and no one had computer science degrees. I was shocked. I thought everyone had to have them because the industry, but no, most people were were there because they loved it. Having a master's degree back then was almost unheard of. Never mind a computer science degree was. And it was almost like a band of musicians that were just together and just hacking around and just trying to make things good. So in the industry then, I loved the industry then because people were really sincere on trying to make good things. Then there was a huge change where people started making tons of money. And that back at the first early days, it was all what I would call development driven, and people cared about the development. It then moved into a phase when we're still caught in that phase, and there's very few, which is called marketing driven. Well, they'll actually put more into marketing than they do actually into development. In some cases, the marketing budgets are 2 to 3 times what the development budgets are.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of companies that are marketing driven, and market, TV, online, Twitch players, whatever they can do to get people playing their game, they will spend the money to do. And Nintendo, as an example, still a development-driven company. I think they're a great company. You know, there are a few other development-driven companies, but by and large, most of the industry is market-driven. And so that switch was pretty substantive. And what tended to happen is you started to get games that looked really good. They really relied on certain technologies to be successful. And they let a lot of people down because they promised the world, which is what marketing does. And then you actually sit down and you play the game, and they tend to be like huge disappointments. So I think the industry changed in that way, where you started getting huge teams, a little bit significantly less soul in each game. And now it's changed again. So I would say that was probably around 10 years ago, where now what's starting to happen is mobile is exploding, and you're starting to have free to play with microtransactions. And this is really, it's sort of a macroeconomic switch where, and this is happening, this is why people are talking about the clouds. And it was pretty funny. I was just listening to some of the advertisement for some of the old some older advertisement 2 or 3 years ago. People were saying the cloud's going to make their game faster. It's going to make it better, use the power of the cloud. That's not, that can be true, but that's not really what the cloud's about. The cloud is about protection of intellectual property. And the macroeconomic change that's happening with video games right now is they're moving from a commodities market to a service market, because what everyone's moving towards now is recurring revenue, where you pay a subscription for something. So if you get Microsoft Office, they don't want to sell you, and they started moving to the cloud because they'd rather charge you every year or every month for the use of that package, where it's up on the cloud, because if you can't break into the cloud, you can't pirate it. And rather than sell you Microsoft Office every year. So everyone's going that way, whether you're doing Adobe Photoshop, everyone's moving to the clouds. Games are going to move to clouds as well. I started talking about that back in 2007, and people were saying that's never going to happen. Then they launched the first cloud service, which didn't do that well, but they will start to do well in the future as technology continues to improve. And one of the big things that people don't understand with clouds and why it's really happening and why it's going to continue to happen is Asia, particularly China, which is now one of the biggest gaming markets in the world, they don't culturally agree with copyright. It's just the way it is there. The copyright laws are fairly lax. A lot of the time, if you would buy a computer over there, it comes stocked with pirated versions of Windows and Office, and they just don't think that you should pay for software. So what they started doing is started making all these things.
That sounds like the American nightmare.
No, it is. It's completely.
Yeah.
And so what happened is they started giving their games away for free, and they started putting them up on servers, which essentially were clouds, and saying, if you liked this game, give a quarter, give $1, and you can advance your character more, and if you like it, you can keep doing it. And that's where the model of microtransactions came from China, because they didn't respect copyright law.
Yeah.
And so, but when you look at video games, and when you look at it, if something's up on the cloud, or you look at League of Legends as an example, assuming you can't break into the server, you can't play that game without logging in. And so essentially you're protecting your intellectual property. So that's how China, I guess through just normal iteration and involvement, came up with this model, and now it's invaded the rest of the gaming industry. So now what you're looking at is it's affecting the market by, as an example, people doing these constant DLCs, or these seasonal passes, or they're really trying to take their commodities market, which is inferior to the service market. The service market with recurring revenue is way better, it makes way more money, and everyone in the AAA industry knows that, and they're trying to figure out how to get over there. So now you've got this massive paradigm shift that people are trying to stay on top of, and you're competing against games that are given away for free at the AAA level. So you got games like Call of Duty sitting there going, how do we start charging people per month? How do we do that? Because that's where the real money is.
Yeah.
And so that has created chaos. So it's kind of the third. That's how games have evolved. So now we're looking at this whole model, and how much should you spend developing a game, and marketing wise, it changes the whole thing. So before, say for Call of Duty, it would always work where you would sit there and dump 2 times the marketing budget than you spent on actually developing the game to get on film and television. Everyone would play Call of Duty. Well, now the biggest game out there right now, one of the biggest games is League of Legends, right? Or another really, really big game is Clash of Clans, which sold recently, I think, to Tencent for $9 or $10 billion.
Good Lord.
It's a mobile game. It's the only game that company's ever made. And so that is just such a change that I think no one really understands what that's going to do. And you've got one other thing that I find, this is also super interesting to me. I guess you have people from the traditional industry like myself and say Nintendo and a few other groups. And what I mean by that is people who have made games for a while and have had more than one hit. So you take, say, let's just take Nintendo, where they have a bunch of really solidified franchises. They're coming against this new microtransaction medium, which is making a lot more money, okay, than the traditional model. And if you look at all the groups that are in this microtransaction model, you know, Clash of Clans, I don't know, what's in the, I
mean, you have games like Clash Royale. You even have Hearthstone.
Yeah, well, Hearthstone comes from Blizzard, but you're right. So, so when I think Blizzard's in the traditional camp, so you've got these new groups that Candy Crush. If you analyze every one of those groups, they've only had one hit. They've never. I can't think of one, and maybe I'm wrong, but I can't think of one of those groups that's had more than one hit.
I mean, I can't either.
They've made tons of money. Well, these two worlds are colliding now. It's like two different dimensions going boom. And a lot of the newer groups, which is almost this new genre, would say it's all about metrics. It's all about mining big data. It's all about probability and where I think groups like us are like, no, that's not what makes a good game, and that in the long run is not what's going to win. But when you look at the numbers of Clash of Clans, where they're making almost $1 million a day, that's a lot more than Call of Duty.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm just throwing Call of Duty out there. I'm not trying to throw Call of Duty under the bus, but I'm just saying, looking the AAA market in video games and what's happening at E3 right now, that is no longer the biggest video game segment. And I don't know how many even gamers even realize that. So that's the latest thing that's going on. That's the newest change, and it's surviving in that kind of world is really where all the AAA groups, like when you look at Sony, when you look at Nintendo, when you look at Microsoft, when you look at EA, they're all looking that way. And I think Blizzard is one of a really good example of a group that's so far transitioned the best.
Yeah.
And that was, a really small team created Hearthstone, right? It was a pretty small team. It was almost an experiment, and it's done so well. So that's what's happening now. So I know that was a really long answer on how the games industry's changed. It was almost like a
no. I mean that's awesome. It was like a strange. It was like a really like good timeline. You know what I mean? But
so that in my eyes, that's what's happening. So yeah.
I mean, and I definitely agree with you as far as the shift to like games as a service. There's definitely a lot of that going on, and a lot of AAA is trying to figure that out. And
that's right.
Where a lot of what you consider the traditional space in video games, like developers sitting down making a game, like this is what this is, and this is, we're going to charge $30, $40, $50, $60 for it, and then that's the game, go check it out. You're seeing that a lot more on the independent side. You're seeing that a lot more in these small, sometimes 1, 2, 15-person teams that are sitting down, cranking out a project for, anywhere between, 3 to 4 years, and then it gets released. And I mean, a prime example from what I can see to kind of correlate with what you're talking about is like Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley was developed by one person, and I often cite this game as like the indie darling that made it, because one person sat down and cranked that game out over a period of time. I think it was a 4-year, like just a passion project really, and he put it out on Steam, and then the game hit and just caught fire, and everyone was like, "Man, have you seen this game? It is amazing!" And was charging, I think when it first came out, it was $25 or $30 on Steam, and then was one of the top ranked games on Steam for close to 5 weeks, and that's just one person making, just money hand over fist. Now, Stardew Valley is still getting support, and it's been ported over to other systems now. It just recently, in the last couple months, went over to PS4. I don't know if Microsoft got their hands on it, but I mean, they're so deep in with Minecraft right now, they probably don't have that on their radar. But it's supposed to be coming to the Switch as well.
Right.
And then there's going to be multiplayer support put into that game. So like this game is continuing to evolve based on the amount of support that it got from just, a fervent fan base. But then on the inverse of that, you have games like For Honor, which I don't know if you're familiar with For Honor, but
I am.
So For Honor came out and had its season pass. It has the microtransactions, and it's still a lot of stuff being supported there. And they're continually putting out updates and balancing stuff, but that game is under a lot of fire right now and has taken a huge hit in its player base because the stuff they're trying to balance and the things they're trying to change and the promises they made with the season passes and stuff like that aren't coming, like I guess you say, like quick enough for that fan base. So they're like, well, no, these balance changes need to happen now because this character class is broken, or there's this particular mechanic that's being exploited by people. A whole laundry list of things. And I think where those two things, like, they kind of merge then separate, is both of them came out and could, if you were to compare them together, be considered AAA games. Even though Stardew Valley was made by one person, just the level of polish and the quality of that game, I would put it up there with any AAA game, in its genre, hands down.
Right.
But then there's so much more expected of Ubisoft and For Honor that when it doesn't deliver, the fan base gets really irritated and they just start to abandon it. And that's where AAA is starting to hurt, because they're trying to put those free to play or those microtransaction things into play, but they're just not able to meet the demand. I guess this is the way to put it.
Well, so I've said this in a couple of videos on our YouTube channel and stuff, and I've said it before. Make no mistake, AAA is dying. It's only a matter of time before it's gone. The commodities market is doomed to go away simply because of how much more efficient and I would say economically viable the microtransaction service model is. So the commodities market, the old AAA, it's got to die. And I think if you're looking at For Honor, this is my opinion, and it's always easy 2020 after game launched. It launched with a AAA price. I think that game was like full price when it, like, as far as the AAA game was. Yeah. And then they wanted full microtransactions. Well, that's not how microtransaction service models work. Yeah. If you look at League of Legends as an example, you could buy packs and stuff like that, but essentially the game was free. You could play that game for free and then spend as much money as you want. And they built up this massive player base where that game became super successful. And For Honor didn't want to take that chance to give the game away for free. I don't know, it's a risk. I know they do all their, the P&Ls and all the numbers and stuff, but I looked at that game because that's a genre that I like to play. And I just looked at it's going to sound bad, but I looked at the price. There's a number of things. For me, mostly it's game time. What am I going to stick, where am I going to put all my time in a video game?
Where's my investment going?
Yeah, that's the biggest investment for me. But the price just kind of went $75 plus microtransactions. I was like, yeah, that was literally where I just went, no. Yeah. And I think that's the problem with that. And so they immediately get this. What used to happen with AAA and now can't happen is you used to release a game and then you were done. It would go off and make its money, and then you go on to do a sequel. You can't do that anymore. And so you have a full cost of a team rolling. So if you're not making a certain amount of money, Ubisoft's just going to look at that and go, we can't afford to keep this going.
Yeah.
Because it's going to keep losing money. And that's, that's, I think, a really good example of the world of the commodities market meeting with the service market and them not blending well. And it's just growing pains. And, usually when there's kind of paradigm shifts like this, a lot of companies will disappear who can't ride the wave. And I'm not implying that Ubisoft won't make it. There's just going to be some companies that aren't going to make the transition. I don't know who it's going to be, but it's a rough transition. And I think a lot of the groups on the other side who have made like Angry Birds and stuff, and those groups, they may not ever have another hit, and they could be done. So, we'll see what happens. But it's a topsy-turvy time and a very hectic time in the video games industry.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I don't worry for Ubisoft, because for every For Honor that they make that doesn't pan out, they're going to release another Assassin's Creed, and as much as people talk crap about Assassin's Creed, people are going to buy it and they're going to play it. And that is that model you're talking about, that finite, okay, this is the game, we've made it, send it off.
Yeah.
All right, we made our money, cool, let's wait a little while and we'll make a new one. Of course, then people get like sequel fatigue at some point, and you do have to come out with something new. And I guess you can count games like For Honor as kind of an experiment that didn't pan out. But I do agree with you though that AAA has to figure something out. They have to figure out how to make a commodity, as you put it, and they have to figure out a way to make it more appealing, as opposed to just, oh well, I can just dump $20 and get new cards on Hearthstone for this game I paid no money for. Like, I played Hearthstone for a year before I ever put any money into it. And then I was like, you know what? I've been playing the crap out of this game. I can give these guys some cash. And that's the type of thinking that players get, especially with games like that, where, or like, what's it called? Oh my gosh, Overwatch, for example. Not to keep tooting Blizzard's horn, but like,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I paid full price for that game, but then you play it for so long, you have a lot of fun. You're like, you know what? Yeah, sure, I'll pay to get a couple loot boxes and see what I get, stuff like that. So I don't know. It's one of those things where I think Ubisoft and other AAA have to really figure out a way to blend with the times, but try and keep their business models as close to home as they can. As close to something they recognize.
Well, yeah, and the interesting thing is when you start talking about a service model versus commodities, one of the things about a commodity is that universally always gets commoditized, and that means it gets worth less and less and less. So me saying that the AAA industry is going to go away, there still may be AAA games, but they have to transition to that service model, because you can't beat recurring revenue, you can't beat microtransactions. If you're releasing a game and you get to the point where you're making $1 million a day, then that's a good number. Yeah. And
last time I checked.
Oh yeah, for sure. And this is what everyone wants. And I think people perceive right now the AAA market as being bigger than it is, simply because of the old model of spending a lot of money on marketing. So if you look at Clash of Clans now, like over the last few years, we're starting to see TV and Arnold Schwarzenegger coming on and doing some stuff for some mobile games and stuff like that. But it's generally much more rare than when you see a Call of Duty. And so there's a lot more noise, and E3 is all centered around AAA games, and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance. But, in the end, the financial models are going to win out. It's just, there's no question. You can't beat market forces. And so that's what the video game industry has grown to, the point now where it started in Japan, really grew to North America. It died in North America for a while. It's brought back to life by Nintendo, really. And now it's spread to Europe, and our Europe grew with it. But Asia was never really part of it. Now it's absolutely a worldwide market. So you've got every country now is participating. And when you start getting success at that kind of macro level, there's a lot of change. There's cultural differences and all of these things. I remember back when I first started making video games, when we made Legacy of Kain, people said to us, this is an RPG on a console. The Ultimas were on the PCs. You can't, you're from North America, you can't make an RPG. People told us that. You can't make an art. You'll never be successful. The only good RPG games on consoles all come from Japan. And I would just remember going, well, whatever, I'm making it. I hope it's good.
You said challenge accepted.
Well, it was just this weird kind of thing. And, but, though that's how much the industry's changed. So now we're looking at, what really deems a successful game. And, certainly there's going to be the critically acclaimed games. Then there's going to be the financially successful games. And then there's going to be the mega hits from these companies that make one game and suddenly they're worth $9 billion. So all of these things are now colliding in this, I guess, cacophony of different values and different theories on what makes what it takes to make a good video game. So almost being in the industry is pretty exciting time, but it's pretty interesting to watch. And it's not clear to me that all the gamers out there see it this way, but it's insane right now and it's kind of fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it all falls out.
Yeah, it's one of those things that at the end of the day you can make predictions and try and look into the crystal ball to see what's going on, but you really just have to see how it shakes out.
Exactly.
All right, so our second to last question, with E3 right around the corner, it's coming up, E3 2017. There's a lot of big heavy hitters out there. Mm-hmm. What is the thing that you're looking forward to the most, or like something that you're excited about hearing about from either Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, doesn't matter, or even third party? Like what is something you're really looking forward to there, coming out of E3 this year?
That's a great question. I guess I realized, I don't know if there is anything in particular. I guess I want to look for something new. I've always been that way.
Yeah.
So as an example, I love Zelda. Always loved Zelda. The latest Zelda game, I agree with you. I think it's the best one. It's amazing. I always look for new stuff, something that is definitively creative, mm-hmm. and something that's good. I'm going to look at it and I can get lost. I know I'm immediately going to be lost in that world and pulled away, and it's going to expand my vision of where games can go. That's what I'm looking for. I don't know if we're going to see it. It's very rare when you see something like that. And strangely enough, sometimes the companies that I never expected will do it. And so we'll wait and see. But, I've got no real expectations except for looking for something new and exciting. I'll tell you, for me personally, one of the least exciting things is hardware. VR and new machines, I'm just like, yeah. Like, don't get me wrong, I think there's possibilities there, but if I thought hardware drove this industry, well, the first talk in the video game conference back in 1996 at GDC, that was one of the first things I said is, technology does not drive this industry. And a lot of people didn't like that message, but that's how I feel. And I think that's the right message, because I don't think it does in the end. I think it's part and parcel of change, and it's a catalyst for change, but it absolutely doesn't drive the industry. So.
All right, so you're looking for that diamond in the rough, that unique thing to come out of E3 this year.
I like new IP. I love new IP. I know. So as an example, let's go to books. I was reading Game of Thrones when it first came out, George R.R. Martin, and love that series. It's really good. I wish he would finish it. But at the time, I came across this book series called Malazan Book of the Fallen. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but if you haven't, it's one of my favorite fantasy series of all time now. It's amazing. It's going to sound crazy, but it's significantly more complex than Game of Thrones. And it's gritty. It's Book of the Fallen is a reference to Napoleon, where he used to carry a book around with all of the soldiers that he was with. He would write down their names in the Book of the Fallen who had died. So this is about military campaigns of the Malazan Empire in this world of magic and gods and different kind of ideas clashing. I strongly recommend it. The toughest thing about the series is the first series is a decology, and they're writing more books now. is the first book is the worst. So, so it's tough to get into. But once you get past that first book, the third book is one of my favorite books of all time on its own, called Memories of Ice. That's a story that takes place over tens of thousands of years and goes through an ice age, and it's really neat.
Wow.
So yeah, and that's the kind of why did I go there to bring it all back? As soon as everyone started reading Game of Thrones, I was like, okay, what's out there that's new? What's going to change my opinion of things? And then I started digging around, and I found Malazan. So that's where I gravitate to. I want to look for things that are interesting and new, the road less traveled, and I hope in some ways, when I'm long dead and gone, when people look at the games that I created, my games will be remembered that way as well. Time will tell, I guess.
Well, I can honestly say that in the 30 years I've been playing video games, I can't think of a game that is exactly like the Legacy of Kain games. Like Blood Omen was,
thanks.
like, I mean, and that's not like me paying lip service. Like it's definitely one of those games. Like I remember playing it, and I remember thinking to myself, like, this, like, the thing that struck me first when I first played the game was this character's a lot more powerful than this game is letting on. And then as you're going through the game and you start to unlock different abilities and stuff like that, it's like, man, like, there's really not much that can stand in my way. Like, this game is really just a roadmap of morality. It's like, do I want to just bypass, like, this group of guys? Do I want to just go in there, just, like, paint the walls red with their blood? Like, how do I feel about this situation? Because I have the power to do, just about anything. And I can think of very few games that empower empower the player like that, with a character that, isn't just like a voiceless, faceless avatar. You know what I mean? Like, you are playing as, as the character, and, like, it is that character's story, but you are still, the moral compass, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I got to say this one thing. It's that you hit on something that most people don't distinguish with, I guess, our games. There, for a long time, there's been this whole idea of when you're playing a game, you let the character, because of agency, because you can make decisions, we're going to give you a blank palette and you can do it. And I think there's a lot of power in that. Anyone who's played the games that I've created, you notice that I didn't do that.
Yeah.
So when we, a lot of people don't know this part of Silicon Knights and my history, but I'm a huge believer in academia. I believe in education. I think that's why we're aligned in many ways on thinking about how we can educate people. So at Silicon Knights, if you're there for more than 10 years, you got a sword. I had some professors at the local university work at Silicon Knights. They worked with us for 15 years.
Wow.
And so they got swords, and they would come in and lecture. And a good friend of mine and colleague, Barry Grant, who's into film and popular culture, one of the first weeks he sat down and he started working with us at Silicon Knights, I said to him, back when we were creating Eternal Darkness, I said, a lot of people think first person is more immersive. It's easier to control, and third person, is not good. It creates problems. What do you think we should do in this scenario? Should we make Eternal Darkness first person, or should we make it third person? And he answered it in such a way that it changed my philosophy. We had done it on Legacy of Kain, but it cemented my view on why we should do the things we do, and why I'm creating the kind of games where I don't think the blank slate is the right way to go. But anyway, here's the answer. His answer was, I don't know enough about video games, Dennis. I just started working with you. It was the beginning of a 15-year, relationship, and he's still my good friend today. So it's gone on for much longer. But he said, I can only tell you about film. And when we first started creating films in Hollywood, they were all first person. And then eventually they started realizing, through the development of the language of film, when you had a third person shot and you can see expression on the on the actor's face, that you could draw much more emotion from the viewer. And he said, ever since that time, as soon as they figured that out and they started developing the language of film, of the up shots and the down shots and the close-ups and the 3/4 views and the wide shots, they never looked back. And so he told me that answer, and I said, well, that's the answer for video games too. It's a visual medium. Mm-hmm. And yes, there's interactivity and there's agency, and you can make a difference as a player, but there's no reason why we can't develop that character. And you can put your stamp on that character, but I think there's something to be said about knowing the history of, say, the Roybus family in Eternal Darkness, or what Kane is going through as a character, as a vampire. And still feel empowered and still have that same level of agency and still make your own decisions, but you're being told that story. So anyway, so you hit on that, and I think that's a lot of times people don't do that, and a lot of people want their RPGs, make your character a male or a female and make them, anything that you want them to be. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's a power in the other direction. And it frankly is something that's being done, it seems, less and less these days. So certainly I think that's the direction that I'll be going in for the near future.
Right on. I mean, and I definitely agree with you. It's not very often that you, like you said, like you have this character that you've developed, but you're giving the agency and the ability to the player. Like the last one in most recent memory I can think of is Horizon Zero Dawn.
Right.
Like the character of Aloy is a very strong character. She has her path set before her, but you as the player are guiding her through her story and making those decisions for her. But it's still her story. A lot of people like to look at games like Skyrim or Fallout and games like that, and it's their story. And there's a place for that in games, but you still need to have those games and those settings and those characters where it is you taking the character through their story. Like you're just along for the ride. You're just witnessing the execution is how it comes out. So
yeah, I agree. I think I agree completely. So when you look at something like Skyrim, and I love Skyrim, I like it a lot.
Put way too many hours in that game.
Oh yeah, I put so many hours in that game. But that's not what I consider a game with a good story. I just wouldn't. It just doesn't come that way. And when I look at other games that have known characters and a good story, those are the ones that I gravitate towards and say, yes, that's a good story. And there is a difference between a story and how you set up your world and nonlinear storytelling and all those things. So it's all this. It's still a wild west out there for video games right now, which excites me because I think there's a lot of undiscovered country, and merging those is and coming up with ideas on how to tell the best ways of telling nonlinear storytelling is always something I'm going to always be working at. But yeah, I agree with you. I just think that I'm going to stay in the direction I'm going to stay, knowing that there's going to be a ton of the other ones. So
yep, and that's a good place to be at. All right, so the final question. This is the only interview question that I give to everybody that I talk to. Aside from a game that you have created yourself or been a part of creating, if you could only play one game for the rest of your life, what is that game?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. It would have to be something. It would have to be something that had a lot of. It would have to be a persistent world that changed all the time. Otherwise, I feel I'd get bored.
Yeah. A lot of people lean toward like MMOs and stuff when I ask this question.
Yeah, it is. So the MMO that I played that might surprise you, I played EVE Online for quite a bit.
Oh man, and, that's next level stuff. I can't touch EVE.
It's a crazy learning curve, and I guess that's the one I would lean towards, unless there was. So there hasn't been since that time an MMO that's grabbed me as much as that game did, and I had to stop playing that game because it was sucking so much of my life. I played WoW beforehand, and then I got into EVE, and I found that I tried to stay anonymous, and people were like, "Hey, do you want to help run?" Because you ran companies in EVE. Do you want to help lead this company? Do you help run this company? I'd be like, "Oh man." I didn't want to say it, but I did it in real life, and I was like, I don't want more real life in my gaming.
Yeah.
But I think something. I guess if I was to pick one right now, I'd pick EVE Online. Now, that's not to say it's my favorite game of all time, but if I had to choose one because it's constantly evolving and there's a massive universe that I can run around and change how I'm playing the game, that would be it.
All right, cool. That's a good answer. The last time I asked that question, the person said that they would go back to playing vanilla WoW and just
Yeah.
start from the beginning and just work their way like real slow over time and just get to present day WoW and just keep playing it from there. And I was like, that's a good answer. That's also a lot of time. It's a
Yeah,
lot
it
of
is. It
hours
is.
invested. All right,
Yeah.
well, that is all the questions that I have. Thank you very much, Dennis, for sitting down with us. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything you want to plug before we leave out and say bye to the kids?
No, I appreciate the time, Tony, and thanks very much for having me. And in the future, when there's more stuff to talk about, I'd love to come back on sometime.
All right, fantastic. It will be a date. All right, well, thank you
Awesome.
guys very
Thank you.
much. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye
Bye.
bye. Hey guys, thank you very much for watching this episode. I felt like I needed to do a bit of a separate outro for this. I didn't want to do the rigmarole. It just didn't feel natural. So this is the rigmarole. Thank you very much for listening / watching this awesome interview with Denis Dyack. It was a really, I learned a lot, and it was really awesome to be able to sit down with him, even over Google Hangouts, and to have such a just a real good conversation about like the state of games and his feeling on games and just what games mean to him. And that was really awesome. So of course, thank you very much for listening and watching this special episode of Binary Gamer. Remember, you can find Binary Gamer in all the places that you listen to podcasts: iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Player FM, all the places where you get podcasts. You can find Binary Gamer. This episode will also be up on the Binary Gamer YouTube channel. I'm not 100% sure when it's going to release. It'll probably be before E3, maybe. Be on the lookout for that. Just actually, the best way to find out is to hit me up on Twitter. So you can follow me over on Twitter at iFlipOfTheSwitch. It's all one word, exactly as it sounds. iFlipOfTheSwitch. You can go over there to either chat me up, ask questions, also to find out when the latest and greatest that's happened with Binary Gamer is going to be happening, whether it's YouTube, iTunes, the podcast, all the different places. So thank you very much for listening. You guys have an awesome day. Class dismissed.